the feature with more number of values. So in this case, with 10 distinct values. Okay. So the idea is, instead of just to avoid this flaw, there is another metric called as gain ratio. So what this gain ratio does is it tries to normalize with respect to the number of distinct values that are there in a given feature. So it's just nothing but a normalized version of your information gain. Okay, so so that's a flaw with this. So now, if you know this flaw, I mean, if I've just told you this flaw. So if you talk about continuous features, so more likely if you use information gain and if you treat this continuous variable as a, I would say, as a discrete variable itself, so it will tend to have a large number of distinct values because it is continuous in nature, right?
Yeah.
So you would tend to pick it more often than a discrete feature.
Right.
So how do you solve this problem? So basically, like, how do you deal with? Okay.
So the bias is created towards the.
So the bias, yeah, towards the. So the one way to deal with that is you directly choose some value. It could be the mean or the median. And try to split based on that. So you decide, let's say the mean is the threshold. So all the features which are, all the values which are less than mean, say they belong to my left partition, and all the values which are higher than my mean or higher than equal to my mean, they belong to my right partition. So essentially I'm creating two partitions.
Right.
So it could be mean, it could be median, it could be mode. So it all depends on you, like what you want to pick. So in case of ID3, it is mean. There is, I mean, there are several variants. So basically, different algorithms choose different metrics. Okay. Now, one more thing. So you know, like how to deal with continuous variables for the problem of classification now. How do you deal with continuous variables? Or rather, let me just ignore the term continuous variables. How do you deal with the problem of regression with decision trees? So now your output variable is continuous. So in classification, you know that your output variable is discrete, right? So how do you deal with, I mean, or how do you construct a decision tree for regression task? Any ideas?
Sir, by principle of reduction of variance, will it work here?
Correct. It does. So can you explain, like, how would you construct such a tree?
Sir, for example, if you have an output variable called age as the target variable, so let us say we compute the age of compute the variance of age, and it comes out to be x. Now the decision tree looks at the various splits formed and calculates the total weighted variance after the splits have been done.
Okay.
It chooses the split which has the minimum variance, and yeah, the main thing is it looks at the minimum weighted variance. So.
Okay. You're exactly right. But let me just simplify it for others. I hope you're able to see the screen. So what I couldn't see your name because I mean, I have a white screen as of now. But so whosoever the student was, he gave a very precise explanation of what could be done. So let me just explain you, like, how it is possible, okay? Or what the student just said. So putting it into plain words, so let's say I have a output variable A. I'm really sorry, I just want to, like. Okay, so this can have values like, say, 1.1, 2.2, say 3.3, and I mean, very small values. Okay, now you have other features, let's say x1, x2, x3. Now these features could be discrete or could be continuous. So okay, so let's say that if x1 is discrete, I'm assuming x1 to be discrete. So let's say this is just one second. So let's say if this is my decision tree, and I'm going to split on some criteria, say x1 is, say, greater than 3. So this part belongs to, say, x1 less than equal to 3, and this part belongs to x1 greater than 3. Is that part clear so far? students? Okay. So now, so what he's trying to say is that, so some of the nodes here so let's say there are 5 samples here in this particular, we just change the color. So there are 5 samples in this node. So what will happen is, so whichever samples are here, let me just figure out the mean of those 5 samples. Let's say the mean of those samples is C bar. So C bar denotes the mean of those 5 samples here, and yi denotes the output of. So let me just rename this A with yi. Yi denotes the mean of, the individual outputs of these 5 samples here. So can someone help me recall what variance is? How do you define variance?
It's a metric that we use to see how varied each element is from the rest. Like it's an average of that. Like
so basically, you are trying to see how far you are from the mean.
Yeah.
So if you look at this particular metric, and if I just square it up, what is C bar? C bar is nothing but the mean of those 5 samples, the output mean of those 5 samples, which is nothing but the mean. And what is yi? Exactly the individual sample output.
Yeah.
So now if I sum these up, and if you want, you can also have, say, 1/5 outside, but that doesn't really matter here. Okay, what this thing is doing is it is actually minimizing the mean for the left partition. Similarly, you would have one thing for the right partition here. So is that part clear? Like how are you constructing a regression tree for, let's say, for this given data set? So with x1, so let's say if I use the feature x1, I can compute this sum for the left partition as well as the right partition, and whichever the result is, I mean, let's say the total result comes out to be, say, 50.7. So with x1, my resultant metric comes out to be 50.7. Similarly, if I say x2, if I use x2 to split this tree, let's say with the splits that I have, the resultant value of this metric comes out to be, say, 30.3. So this particular node x1 gives me you can say a gain of 50.7 with respect to maximizing the variance. The feature x2 gives me a gain of 30.3 with respect to maximizing the variance. Similarly, x3 gives me, say, 10.1. So which feature should I choose? Whether it should be x1, x2, or x3? Are you guys with me?
So these are variances, right?
These are variances for each of the features x1, x2, and x3.
Right. Not the square, so just variances.
Basically, I would say these are the, so even if you take the square root, it doesn't really matter, right? Because we are going to eventually compare it across all the features.
Yeah.
So as long as the metric is consistent, it doesn't really matter. So in this case, we are still trying to maximize the variance, which is nothing but deviation from your mean. So let's say x1 gives you some value which is 50.7, x2 gives you 30.3, x3 gives you 10.1. So which feature should I choose?
X1, right? Because we are trying to
maximize the variance. So that's how you can construct a regression tree.
Right.
Okay. So basically, at your root node, you would then choose x1. So now whichever samples are remaining with you, on those samples, you will try to again figure out whether I should choose x2 or x3. That is how you build a decision tree, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, one more thing. Now in this example, I took x1, x2, x3 to be all discrete. What if one of the variables is, continuous here? What would you do then? can we use the same strategy which we had in, which we were using for building classification trees?
The concept of variance will be slightly different for the continuous variable because,
Right. In the case of classification trees where a variable was continuous, we were trying to split the tree based on a threshold value that we chose. It could be mean, median, or something, right?
right, yeah,
So here also we could do it, right? It's just that we have to. It's just that we have to really decide on what that threshold should be. Are you with me or not? I mean, I can certainly choose the mean and try to split this tree further. I will still get some variance, right?
right. You will get it, but even the variance itself will be continuous, right?
Why would you say variance would be continuous? See,
Because
we are trying to build a regression tree for the output variable y.
yes,
Right now, I'm saying that let's say x3 is continuous.
okay.
So it has continuous values. So what I'm going to do is, let's say the mean value is 5. So
Okay.
I'm going to use this as a threshold, and I would say all the samples which are greater than 5, they are put in one node, and all the samples which are less than 5 or less than equal to 5, they are put in another.
Okay.
And then I can repeat the same process here, right?
Okay. Okay, fine then. Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with basically the output here.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter, right? If it's discrete or continuous, we kind of do it the same way.
No, it does matter. That's why I'm coming. That's what the next point
But
is.
we are doing the same thing, right? Okay, cool.
You can actually do it this way. I'm not saying that you cannot do it this way. So basically, I told you, there are different variants, different algorithms out there which use different strategies. So if you are using this strategy, this is commonly used by this ID3 algorithm, this iterative dichotomizer algorithm. Okay, where you try to maximize the information gain, and you try to, for a continuous variable, you try to pick a mean or a mode value to split the node further.
Right.
Okay, now there is another variant of it, which is, I would say, a better algorithm, but a slightly computational intensive one, which is called as C4.5. So what this algorithm does is, so instead of just picking the mean or let's say a median or some value for the threshold, why don't we pick, say, some some of the continuous values that exist in my feature already. So let's say, let me just give you an example. So let's say my feature x3 was a continuous feature, and let's say this has values, say, so these are some of the values. So instead of picking, say, mean or median, why don't I check for, say, this 2.31 and 3.14 or 2.16? Why can't my threshold be like this? Are you with me or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the idea is, I will try to look at all the different possibilities that are out there. So instead of just assuming the threshold to be the mean value, I will see if I will try to build or I will try to compute the variance when, let's say, I choose the threshold as, say, 1.05. So basically, this is like a wrong thing. So I know that the values are, the minimum value is 1.05 and the maximum value is 3.14. So it would make sense to use like one of the values as maybe 2.31 and 2.16, because if I choose the extremities as one of the thresholds, then in at least one of the partitions would be empty. Do you get that part?
Yes, sir.
So let's say I can choose, for this particular example, I can choose two thresholds. So with 2.31, I can compute like what is the variance. With 2.16, I can also compute the variance. Whichever value gives me the maximum variance, I can go with that particular threshold. So this is just computational intensive. The same idea, instead of choosing the mean as the straightforward threshold, you can pick up any particular feature value that exists in your feature and split the tree based on that. Is that part clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now you can do regression with decision trees, and you can also handle continuous variables. Now let me come to just give me a second. This ensemble learning, like we were talking about how do we reduce the variance in decision trees. So somebody said we can do bagging, right? So Purna, I believe, said bagging, and somebody gave me this definition of bagging. Okay, so it's not that we can only do bagging. There are tons of ways to reduce your overfitting. Okay, so ensemble learning or ensemble learning, or howsoever you want to call it. So this is one of the ways to avoid overfitting. So I'll be discussing this in detail today. I am sorry for consuming like 35 odd minutes to, gauge like what has been covered in the past session so far. Okay, so like why ensemble learning? Why is it so popular? So even though this is I hope everybody knows about Kaggle. Are you aware of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So okay. So back in I would say maybe close to 2009 or so, there was a very popular competition where the first prize was like $1 million. So Netflix hosted a competition where the goal was to simply predict what is the user rating for a movie. Now, most of these, so these are the submissions for that competition on Kaggle. And I just want to highlight that if you look at the second submission, which is an ensemble, so it won the second prize. So back in the days when there were no neural networks and only support vector machines were popular back in the, during that time. So still, that point in time, ensemble did very well. Okay, so ensemble, as the term itself suggests, it comprises of a multitude of different, I would say, models. Now, these models can be the same or these models can be different. The thing which differs is how do you train these models, how do you optimize these models, and how do you actually combine the predictions from these models. So we'll be discussing that, in ensemble learning. So can you just tell me, like, has ensemble learning been covered in your previous sessions?
No, sir.
Okay. Apart from bagging, so bagging also comes under ensemble learning. So apart from bagging, is there any other topic which has been covered, like boosting or stacking, blending, like all those things?
So is pruning a method of reducing?
Can you
pruning?
repeat the term? Pruning? No. So pruning, so rule-based pruning is one of the ways in which you can minimize the overfitting in decision trees. Similarly, there is, there are two methods, which are more popular with single decision trees. One is like rule-based pruning, which you just said, and the other method is reduced error pruning. So these two methods are quite popular with decision trees. Another method is ensemble learning that we are studying today. That's not an ensemble learning method though. It's a method for reducing the overfitting. Similar to that, ensemble learning is another method to reduce overfitting. We'll be discussing ensemble learning in general. It's not just for decision trees. You can use it for any classifier or any regressor. So we'll discuss that today. Okay, is that fine? Yes.
So in this picture, the first term 0.8567 is the accuracy. What about the 10.06, sir?
No. So this is not the accuracy. This is, see, we are trying to predict the movie ratings. It's not, so the movie ratings are from 0 to 5. So it's a, it's a mean score. Like, you know what is R square in terms of a regression task? If not R square, are you aware of like, what's the terminology? Give me a second now.
So you're talking about correlation?
Not exactly correlation, no. So let's say I'll give you. So assume that one of the movies has a rating say 3.1, and the prediction comes out to be say 2.2. I'm forgetting the terminology here. So I'll take the difference and then square it up. Okay, and then sum it across all the different movies. So whatever this metric is, or you can call it, say, squared error. Yeah, that's the terminology. So let me just call it as mean squared error, or you can call it as average squared error. Or so this value that you see over here, lesser it is, the better. If you look at the best test score, the lesser it is, the better. Percentage improvement. Okay, so this is what you're talking about, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, this is something else. So this is so Netflix back then had their own algorithm for predicting the movie ratings. So this is improvement with respect to their own algorithm.
Oh, right.
So
Thank you.
sorry, if I confused you.
Well,
Okay,
that's fine.
all right. Coming to why do ensembles actually work? Okay, so just giving you a general motivation. I mean, whenever you go buy a product, say on Amazon or some commercial website, what do you usually do? You look at the reviews, right? You look at different opinions from different users. You look for, for a product's fragility. You look for the durability and all different factors, and then you try to pick up or buy a product by looking at different opinions. So, so what are the two factors that we are looking at? One is how good the product is, and the second is the diversity or the diversity of opinions that are out there to buy a product. Another example is when you apply to, say, for higher studies, when you apply to a university, they ask you for several referrals. I mean, it's a very big process where you have to go through like an online application, you submit your transcripts. So the idea is they look at a variety of sources to evaluate your application. So from the general context, ensembles are very useful. Ensemble means looking at a multitude of sources to evaluate a given task. Okay, so this is like the general intuition. I'll try to answer these questions like why do ensembles work better than single classifiers? So we'll discuss this, soon enough in the coming slides. Okay, so the question arises, how do I actually generate different classifiers? So as you would know, that ensemble means multiple things or multiple, say, models. So in the context of classification, I would use the term classifiers. In the context of regression, I would use the term regressors. So ensemble learning consists of building multiple models for the given task. So how do we actually generate different, I would say individual classifiers or regressors? So these individual classifiers or regressors, they are called as base models, or in the context of classification, they would be called as base classifiers. The next question comes like, how would you combine the different predictions from those individual ones? So these are some of the popular methods that we are going to study: bagging, boosting, and hierarchical mixture of experts. That there are other popular ensemble learning algorithms as well. I'll try to give you, so basically, as you would know, machine learning is an extensive, research-oriented area. So there are tons of algorithms out there. I'll try to give you flavors from each one of them. And these are a few popular ones. Apart from these, I'll try to list maybe 10 to 15 others. I'll give you an intuition of each one of those. Okay. Now, coming back to like how you would, merge different predictions altogether. So it depends on if you're doing classification or regression. So I'll talk about like in what ways you can combine them. Okay. So one of the reasons is like why would you use ensemble learning? So let's talk from the statistical perspective. Okay. So let's say that I have two models. One of the models could be let's assume the models to be the same. So one is a neural network, let's say N1. Another is again a neural network, but N2. So both the neural networks, they have the same performance. So both achieve an accuracy of 70%. Do you think that, or rather, so if these models have different initializations. Has neural networks been covered to some extent?
Yes, sir. ANNs.
Okay. Okay. So with these artificial neural networks, they were started with some different initializations. So the weights they were, they started with, they were different. So let's say one was started with, say, some initialization with a standard deviation of weights to be, say, 0.01, another started with a standard deviation of 0.05. Do you think that even though their accuracies are the same, they will work the same on the given test set? Could there be any differences?
Yes, sir.
Like in what sense?
I mean, one of them could be overfitted and it'll be just saying 70% for
No.
that thing, but
So
in the
70%
test set,
doesn't really mean overfitting.
I know, like it'll be more than 95% and all that, but
Okay. No, what I'm asking is, can their predictions differ on the same input sample?
oh yes, they can.
They
Maybe
can,
one
right?
chose another. Yes, sir.
Okay. And why is it possible? I mean, why is it happening? The primary reason for it?
So you said both of them have the same number of hidden layers and same number of
Correct.
nodes
The
in
model
each
is exactly the
test,
same.
right?
Yeah, the model is exactly the same. So is it possible that on the same input sample, their predictions can differ, even though they have the same accuracy, exactly the same accuracy?
I think so, yes, sir, because there is this stochastic element in them, right? So we randomly sample
Correct.
on each POC. So
Exactly right. Okay. So the idea is, yes, they can. The reason is actually the loss function that you optimize for neural nets. It's a non-convex function. I hope you are aware of the terminology convex and non-convex. So in the case of non-convex functions, you can have multiple minimas. So one of the neural networks, based on its initialization, can get stuck in a local minima, which could be altogether different from the neural network's N2's local minima. So you can have altogether different. Even though the performance is the same, you can have different outputs on different samples, or even on the same samples. Okay, so why is it that? Okay, let me just rephrase this question again. What if I use, say, my data set is very limited and I'm building a very shallow neural network? The number of hidden layers are very small in number. So I have this capacity to train my neural networks in one go. I can feed in the entire data and train my neural network. So in that case, do you think like the answers can still be different? I mean, you just said based on the stochastic part, so I am removing that stochastic part altogether.
So then, I mean, once you remove the stochastic part, there is no element of randomness, and then
No, there is
becomes
right. Depends. See, I just said the weights, the initialization weights are different, right?
okay, then it will be yes, sir.
No, even okay. So in that case, I mean, if you have the same set of weights, yes, the resultant model will come out to be exactly the same. However, when the initialization weights are different, and if you're feeding in the entire data in one go, even then the classifiers can differ. Okay, now coming back to that part. So do you think that it makes sense to feed in the entire data in one go for the two neural networks that we have?
Entire data as in
So let me just rephrase the question in in a couple of more sentences. So I want to use these two models to achieve some better performance in comparison to these individual models. So
okay,
does it make sense to feed in the entire data to both of these models?
No. I can take random subsamples of these things and feed each subsample to each of those things and see how they perform on those random.
So why are you saying so? I mean, I need the reason for it. I mean, it's
So
just
when you, yes, sure. So when you given randomized subsample data and dataset inputs to each of these models, you get to test them on different levels of data. It's like this thing called hypothesis testing in correlation when we use it to see if it's not being overfitted. The same way over here, if we try and see the performance of these models on different scenarios more effectively, then we would get to see if you're giving the whole data in one go.
okay. So let me just, revise this scenario further. What if you are using, say, gradient descent as to optimize the weights for, say, linear regression task?
Okay.
Okay. So you're using gradient descent. You given the entire data at once. Do you think that you will end up in a different solution for the two different models that we have?
So two different models, same weights.
No, yeah, you can start with even
We
different
give the
weights.
entire data.
You can start with different
Okay.
weights. All I'm saying is I am giving you an infinite amount of time to reach to the minima
Right.
out there.
Okay. But
So in that
I mean,
case,
sir, different weights, it does, yeah, it will not, sir. I mean, sorry.
No, I am saying that you are given an infinite amount of steps to reach to the minima. Okay, do you know that with linear regression, the function is convex, so there is only one global minima.
Okay, then yes, sir. Then yes.
So basically, the resultant model will be exactly the same. So in that
Yes.
case, when the function is convex, it doesn't make sense to give in the entire data at once. In
Right.
case of neural network, you can give it, but it can also end up in different minimas. But in the case of, say, any model which has a convex function, it doesn't make sense really. Okay, so in that case, what people do is, as you said, they give a subset of this training data to each of those individual models. So in order to get two things, so one is diversity. So basically, one model sees a portion of your data, another model sees some other portion of your data. I'll talk about the accuracy aspect soon. So we just want to ensure that we do good for each of those individual models. But how good, that is a different, I would say, issue altogether. I'll talk about this issue soon enough. Okay, or rather, let me pose this as a question to you. So there are, say, two scenarios. In both of these scenarios, I have two models each. In one of the scenarios, say my two models are having an accuracy of 90%, close to 90% each. And in another scenario, I have my two models are having an accuracy of between a range of 60 to 70%. What do you think, or where will you think? Under which scenario the final prediction will come out to be better?
Sir, so both of these models have 60 to 70% accuracy.
Yeah, and in another scenario, I have two models where both of them have close to 90% accuracy.
Okay.
So, so what do you really think? Like in this case, instead of assuming 2, you can assume, say, 20.
Okay.
Let me just make it more rigorous. So let's assume 20.
So 20 models, same algorithm, different weights each.
You do not think about the weights. I'm just saying that you have even if you can assume the same models altogether across the two scenarios, you can assume it to be decision trees.
Okay, fine.
But not fully grown decision trees. I'm just talking about, say, one level decision tree, which is usually called as a decision stump.
Okay.
So if you build a tree where you for only one level, so something like this, which I've drawn on the bottom part.
Right.
So it's called as a decision stump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm saying that I have 20 decision stumps in one scenario and 20 decision stumps in another scenario. In one case, each decision stump performs 90% more accurately, and in another case, they all perform close to, like, in between 60 to 70%. In what scenario do you think the final prediction would be better?
I think I mean it's just a stump. Wait, so I think it's the 60 to 70% one. It won't exactly. I kind of have a feeling that it's not 80 to 90% for some reason.
Yes. So what we will see, I mean, soon, that so whenever we are trying to build these base classifiers, see, in
Right.
ensemble learning, we try to build individual classifiers, right? Which we call it as the base classifiers. So we will see soon that these base classifiers, they have to be weak learners in order to finally achieve a very strong prediction. And what I mean by weak learners is any learner or any model which has a chance or which has a prediction power of greater than chance. What I mean by chance is, so let's say you are given a binary task where you just have to predict 0 or 1. So a weak learner would be anything which predicts more than a coin toss, which is it has a performance of greater than 50%. So anything which has a or any model which has a performance of greater than 50% for a binary task is considered to be as a weak learner. So we would prefer our individual models to be weak learners. So when we talk about ensemble learnings, so even if so let's say your models are decision trees, so there you would not grow the decision tree fully. You would try to use weak learners. So in general, when you build, say, a single level decision tree or you build a decision stump, obviously it's going to be a weak learner, right?
Yes.
In most cases, I can say, right? I mean, at least the prediction would be better than half of the scenario in a classification task.
It'll be, but it's just one level, sir. You can't expect much.
So even if I can say it's a binary classification task, I will tend to do better than 50%, right? Do you agree? Do you agree on that or not? Otherwise,
yes.
I'm not achieving a high information gain to split that node further, right?
I agree on that.
So think about this. If my training set contains 50% zeros and 50% ones in my output, if I split it on one level, at least I should gain an accuracy of more than 50%, right?
True.
After splitting. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to use a decision tree there. All I can do is a coin toss, and whatever number comes, I mean, at least even with a coin toss, I can get a 50% accuracy.
Yes.
On an average, given I have enough number of samples to test on, right? So the idea is how to build these weak classifiers. So building these weak classifiers, you will pick a subset of your data. So if I give it the entire data, all the models that I will be building, I mean, they will be the same. Basically, there will be no diversity. So think about this. I have two decision trees. I give entire data to those two decision trees. So depending on if I give the entire data, two decision stumps would come out exactly to be the same, right? There would be no diversity there.
Yes.
If you give the entire data as it is for building two decision trees, because there is no starting point in decision trees, right? Unlike in neural networks, your models will come out exactly the same. So whatever prediction will be there, it will be exactly the same. So there is no point in building two weak classifiers there. So how can I build two weak classifiers? I have to take a subset of my data. So look at this figure. So in this figure, I have H1, H2, H3, H4. So these are certain hypotheses or some models. And these models tell you that, so assuming it to be a regression task, so H3 comes with an average score here, H4 comes here, H1, H2 here. And if I combine let's say the average of all these four models, it comes closer to this, you can say true hypothesis F. So that is why in ensemble learning, what we do is we try to, you can say, give subsets of your data, basically different portions of my entire space to each individual model in order to achieve or in order to look at, each individual partition of your data, because it is quite possible that one single model may not be able to learn a very complex decision boundary. So you may need multiple classifiers or multiple regressors to do so.
Hmm.
So I'll show you an example as well. I think the class is at till 11:35, right? Or 11:30.
11:35, sir.
Okay, okay. So let me just show you. Okay. Another thing that I told was like, if you look at from the computational perspective, I mean, as we just discussed, like even in neural networks, I mean, because of the abundance of data nowadays, we have to give the data in chunks. So why can't we train neural networks? I mean, or any other model if we have the data in abundance in chunks. So basically, not giving in the entire data, we give in, I mean, chunks. I mean, if the data is available in abundance, or we give a portion of this data. Okay, that is like another motivation for ensemble learning. Another is like, what if the data is very limited? So basically, what you do is you try to do resampling. Has any resampling technique been taught to you?
There has been k-fold this
No,
thing.
that's not a resampling technique. So what I mean by a resampling technique is, assume that you have a scenario where you're trying to do classification. So there the outputs are like zeros and ones, where the number of zeros are very less.
Right.
Let's say 95% of data is having an output 1 and only 5% data is having an output 0. So what will you do in that case? Basically, the output has a very skewed distribution.
You can just simply say yes for all or no for all, you'll get more than 50%. But I think for that,
No. Even if you, so in this case, if you predict everything as 1, you will have a 95% accuracy.
Yeah.
I mean, if
see
you
that.
just randomly sample it. So the idea is, what you do is you try to generate more samples from the class 0. And I would say these are artificial samples, basically synthesized samples. So there are several techniques to do so. I mean, I'm just giving you this term out there. If you are, if you guys want to explore, this is called as imputation.
So you look at the data of zeros and try to synthesize more of those data values and then train on it.
Yeah, it's the same idea. Has this been taught to you, like how to deal with missing values or null values in your data set?
No, sir. I mean, I don't recall. Maybe it was, but
Okay. So assume that so when you construct a data set, not all the values that are given. Okay. So let me just give you an intuition of what is happening. In essence, let's say there is a data set given to you, and some of the time, whosoever is the data collector, I mean, there might be an issue. Let's say the instrument is not working properly, or I mean, when he was trying to manually annotate a particular data set, he missed out certain entries. So there you would see missing values or null values, or sometimes incorrect values as well.
Right.
So in that case, how do you deal with those? So there is a thing called as imputation.
Yes.
No. I mean, one such thing that you could do is ignore all those samples where there is an issue. Other thing that you could do is like try to put some appropriate values there. You try to so that part is called as imputation.
Okay.
So so I'm just giving you a hint like what could be done. So what you can do is whatever. So let's say for a feature you're trying to fill in some missing values. Okay. So take all the other features as your input set, and wherever the value is present in this particular feature, you treat this variable as the output feature. You simply do predictions for the missing values. Train a classifier or a regressor depending on if the variable is continuous or discrete. You train a predictor for it and figure out like what could be the possible set of values here, just as we do with normal predictions. Do you get this idea, like what is happening?
So do we do this after the entire tree is done, ignoring those values, or do we do it in the process of when we encounter them? Till then?
No. I'm telling you as a pre-processing step. This is not very specific to decision trees altogether. In decision trees, you can do much more. Decision tree is one such algorithm where you do not have to deal with missing values. You can actually, there are several ways to avoid missing values. I'll tell you how to do it. I mean, how you can avoid this with null values. So assume that you're training a linear regression model. There is a feature, let's say, called as temperature, which stores the current temperature today. Okay, and my temperature value is missing. So my model is going to give either you have to substitute a 0, but if you substitute a 0, then this becomes a noisy sample, right? If your data set has no value in this temperature field. So do you get this part? Like, how would you do it? So let's say I have data for the past 360 days, and I have a row for the current day as well for my model to be trained. But there the temperature value is missing. What I can do is I can train a different basically regressor where temperature will be treated as the output variable. The rest of the features will be treated as the input. I can predict now how what the temperature is today by looking at the rest of the feature values. Do you get this part? Anyone? I mean, if you are able to get it, or if it is not clear to you, let me know.
I mean, it's clear. So we're just using a linear regression to fill in data.
Yes. So you can basically use any such model. This is called as imputation. So this imputation technique can be extended for generating synthetic data. Okay, I'm going to stop here. We'll be taking this ensemble learning topic forward from the next session, which is on, I think, Tuesday. Any doubts so far?
Sir?
Yes.
You said imputation is basically used when we have like very small data sets of certain output.
No,
right?
no. Imputation is a technique where we try to find out or we try to fill in missing values or null values in our data set.
Okay, that's it.
Okay,
so
that can be extended. That can be
Okay.
extended to generate synthetic data.
Okay. So, sir, isn't this synthetic data like prone to bias or overfitting?
Yes, there is. Given the same example whereby I had, say, 95% ones and 5% zeros, why can't I take, say, 5% ones randomly and I look at those 5% zeros and then train a classifier with this 10% data? But then I'm not making use of those 90% remaining one data, right?
Yes, sir.
So it would make sense to generate more synthetic data for the samples corresponding to the label 0. See how you can do it. So assume that there is a sample which has the inputs as all ones, but the output is actually 0. Okay. Can I induce some amount of noise in this sample? Let's say all the inputs, I'll change it to 1.01. I'll add or subtract 0.01 to each of the input features, but my output still remains 0. I can do that, right? This is not going to change much. Do you get this part? Even though I'm inducing noise, I have one more sample with me.
Yeah.
So this is called as, synthesizing new data.
Okay.
So there are, different techniques to do it. This particular technique uses nearest neighbor, which I just told you. So what you can imagine is, if you, let's say, if you can figure out a space where all the samples belong to class 0, I can randomly pick some points from there. I can randomly generate some points from that space to increase my data set. So let's stop here now. I'll discuss it in more detail in the next class. I hope this session was useful to you. I wanted to do a little bit of assessment of like what has been covered earlier. So, and in the last 30 minutes, we could cover a few topics. You guys can move on and we'll discuss, this ensemble learning in more detail in the next session. If you have questions, you